There are miles of tunnels and forgotten rooms beneath every old city. Some were sealed off and forgotten decades ago. But forgotten doesn't mean empty. Welcome to True Terror Files Official. Tonight, 3 people went underground. A homeowner looking for a leak, an explorer chasing a legend, a worker doing his job. All 3 found something that should have stayed buried. These are their stories. A man named Warren Kemp bought a century-old farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town in upstate New York. It was a fixer-upper. But the price was right, and Warren, a retired electrician, was eager for a project to fill his days. He'd been living there for about 6 months when he noticed a persistent, musty smell coming from a corner of the dirt floor basement. He assumed it was a dead rat or a mold issue and decided to investigate. The basement was typical for a house of that age. Low ceilings, stone foundation walls, and a floor of packed earth. But in one corner, behind a stack of old paint cans left by the previous owner, he noticed something odd. The dirt wasn't packed hard like the rest of the floor. It was loose, as if it had been recently disturbed. Warren grabbed a shovel and started digging. About a foot down, his shovel hit something solid. He cleared away the dirt and found a heavy, rusted iron hatch, the kind you'd see on a ship. It was about 3 feet square, set into a concrete frame. Warren's heart was pounding. He'd lived here for 6 months and had no idea this was here. It took him nearly an hour to pry the rusted hatch open. The hinges screamed in protest, and a blast of cold, stale air rushed out from the darkness below, carrying that musty smell intensified 100-fold. He shone his flashlight down. A narrow vertical shaft dropped about 10 feet to a dirt floor. Fixed to one wall was a rickety wooden ladder. Curiosity is a powerful force. Warren, despite every instinct screaming at him, climbed down. At the bottom, he found himself in a tunnel. Not a natural cave, this was man-made. The walls were shored up with old, rough-hewn timbers, and the ceiling was just high enough for him to stand if he hunched slightly. The tunnel led away from his house, sloping gently downward. He followed it. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, maybe 15 feet across. The air was cold and damp, and his flashlight beam cut through swirling motes of dust. This was clearly a living space. In the center of the room was a makeshift bed, a rusted metal frame with a stained, filthy mattress. Next to it was a small wooden table with a melted candle stub and a stack of old yellowed paperback books. But what made Warren's blood run cold was the other side of the chamber. The walls there were covered in drawings, childlike drawings done in what looked like charcoal and faded crayon. They depicted stick figures in a house that resembled his own farmhouse. But all the figures' faces were scratched out or drawn over with heavy black scribbles. And on the floor beneath the drawings, he saw a small pile of items, a few empty tin cans, a rusty spoon, and a child's sneaker. It was small, worn, and covered in a dark, rusty stain that Warren desperately hoped was mud. As he stood there, frozen, he heard a sound from the tunnel behind him, the direction he had come from. It was a soft, sliding shuffle, like someone moving carefully across the dirt floor. He spun around, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. The tunnel was empty, but the shuffling sound continued, and it was getting closer. Then it stopped, a voice low and raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years, whispered from the darkness just beyond his light. "You're not supposed to be down here. This is my home. Go back, before I make you stay." Warren didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled back up the tunnel, his hands and knees scraping against the dirt and rock. He practically flew up the wooden ladder, his foot slipping once, sending a cascade of dirt down into the shaft. He pulled himself out, slammed the iron hatch shut, and dragged every heavy piece of junk in his basement on top of it. He called the police, but by the time they arrived and he worked up the courage to move everything, the hatch was gone. Just solid, packed dirt where it had been. The officers found nothing. Warren knows what he saw and what he heard. He sold the farmhouse 2 months later at a loss and moved into a modern apartment with a concrete slab foundation. He told me he still has nightmares about that voice and that small stained sneaker. And he wonders if, somewhere deep beneath that old house, someone is still down there, drawing pictures. Our second account comes from a young woman named Sabine Moreau, an urban explorer and photographer from Montreal. She specialized in documenting abandoned infrastructure factories, silos, and especially the forgotten railway tunnels that snaked beneath the older parts of the city. She was careful, methodical, and never explored alone, except for one night, when her usual partner canceled at the last minute, and she decided to do a quick solo run through a tunnel she'd been scouting for weeks. It was an old Canadian Pacific Railway tunnel, built in the late 1800s and abandoned when the line was rerouted in the 1960s. The entrance was hidden in a wooded ravine, sealed with a rusted iron gate that had been pried open just enough for a person to squeeze through. Sabine had her camera gear, her heavy-duty flashlight, and a small backpack with water and a first aid kit. She wasn't planning to go far, just a few hundred meters in, to get some shots of the old brickwork and the way the light from the entrance faded into absolute blackness. She squeezed through the gate and stepped into the tunnel. The air was cold and damp, smelling of wet stone and decay. The floor was uneven, littered with fallen bricks and twisted pieces of rusted metal. Her footsteps echoed in the vast, curved space, the sound bouncing off the walls in a way that made it seem like someone was walking just behind her. She walked for about 10 minutes, pausing occasionally to take photos. The entrance was now just a faint pinprick of gray light far behind her. The darkness ahead was absolute, a solid wall of black that her flashlight seemed to barely penetrate. That's when she heard it. A footstep. Distinct, clear, and definitely not an echo. It was out of sync with her own steps, coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnel ahead of her. She stopped. The footsteps stopped. Her heart hammered in her chest. She called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Hello? Is someone there?" Her voice echoed down the tunnel and faded into a deep, oppressive silence. She waited a full minute, straining to hear. Nothing. She told herself it was just water dripping, or a rat, or her own imagination. She turned to head back toward the entrance, and that's when she heard it again. Footsteps. Multiple footsteps. It's coming from behind her now, from the direction of the entrance, and they were getting closer. Sabine's blood ran cold. She started walking faster, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly as she navigated the uneven floor. The footsteps behind her sped up to match her pace. They were heavy, deliberate, like someone in heavy boots. She broke into a jog, then a full run, her lungs burning with the cold, damp air. The footsteps behind her were running too, closing the distance. She could hear breathing now, ragged, wet, labored breathing that seemed to come from right behind her left shoulder. She didn't dare look back. She saw the pinprick of light from the entrance growing larger ahead. She ran with every ounce of strength she had, her ankles twisting on loose bricks, her hands scraping against the rough walls. She burst through the gap in the iron gate, tearing her jacket, and collapsed onto the damp leaves of the ravine floor, gasping for breath. She finally looked back at the tunnel entrance. It was dark and silent. Nothing emerged. She lay there, shaking until she could breathe normally. She never went back to that tunnel. Later learned from an old city archive that in 1947, a railway worker named Armand Gagnon had been killed in that very tunnel. He was walking the line at night, inspecting the tracks, when a train he didn't hear coming struck him from behind. His body was found the next morning, his heavy work boots still on his feet. Sabine is convinced that on certain nights, Armand is still walking that tunnel, still doing his job, and he doesn't like company. Our final story takes us to the outskirts of a small town in rural England, where a construction crew was clearing land for a new housing development. The foreman, a grizzled, no-nonsense man named Gareth Hughes, had been in the business for over 30 years. He'd uncovered his share of oddities: old wells, forgotten septic tanks, even a buried car once. But nothing prepared him for what the excavator unearthed on a drizzly Tuesday morning. The machine's bucket hit something solid about 6 feet down. Gareth assumed it was a large boulder and signaled the operator to dig around it. As the dirt was cleared, they revealed a thick, reinforced concrete slab with a heavy, rust-streaked steel hatch set into it. It was clearly a bunker, likely from the Cold War era. Gareth's curiosity was piqued. He and 2 of his crew managed to pry the heavy hatch open. A rush of stale, metallic-smelling air escaped from the darkness below. A metal ladder descended into a small, square room. Gareth grabbed a high-powered flashlight and climbed down. The bunker was surprisingly well preserved. The walls were bare concrete. There was a small metal cot with a rotting mattress, a wooden table, and a single folding chair. On the table were a few items: a rusted tin cup, a faded copy of a 1960s newspaper, and a small leather-bound journal. Out to Gareth's flashlight swept across the walls. One wall was covered in writing. Not graffiti, this was a message scrawled repeatedly in what looked like dark, faded paint, or possibly something else. The same words over and over, in shaky, desperate handwriting. They forgot us. They left us down here. We can't get out. Gareth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold underground air. He picked up the leather journal from the table. The pages were yellowed and brittle. The handwriting inside was the same as on the wall. The journal detailed the final days of a man named Edward Croft, a civil defense volunteer who had been assigned to this bunker during a drill in 1962. According to the journal, there was a cave-in at the entrance during the drill. The bunker was buried. Edward and his partner, a young woman named Alice, were trapped. They had food and water for a few weeks. They had a radio, but it was broken. They waited for rescue that never came. The journal entries became more frantic, more desperate as the days turned into weeks. The final entry was dated 42 days after the cave-in. It read, "Alice is gone. She stopped breathing this morning. I am alone now. The light is failing. If anyone finds this, please tell our families we waited. We waited so long. I am going to try to dig. I can hear something on the other side of the wall. Scratching, it might be help. It might be something else. I don't care anymore. I just want out." Gareth closed the journal, his hands trembling. As he stood there in the oppressive silence, he heard it, faint distant sound coming from the far wall of the bunker. A soft rhythmic scratch. 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 Like fingernails on concrete. He didn't wait to investigate. He scrambled up the ladder and ordered his crew to seal the bunker back up immediately. They filled the hole and moved the planned housing site 50 yards to the west. Gareth never told the authorities what he found. He told me that some things are better left buried, and he still wonders what Edward Croft heard on the other side of that wall, and if it's still down there, scratching, waiting. 3 descents. 3 encounters with the forgotten world beneath our feet. Warren found a network of tunnels and a voice telling him he didn't belong. Sabine heard footsteps following her through an abandoned railway tunnel, and Gareth uncovered a Cold War bunker and a journal detailing a desperate, lonely death. The ground beneath us holds secrets, miles of tunnels, forgotten rooms, and buried histories. And sometimes those places aren't as empty as we assume. If these stories gave you chills, you're in the right place. This is True Terror, Files Official. We bring you the darkest, most unexplainable true encounters every single week. Smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Now, tell us in the comments, have you ever found something underground that you can't explain? A hidden room, a strange tunnel, a sound that didn't belong? Share your story. We read every single one. Until next time, stay above ground. And if you find a hatch in your basement, maybe don't open it.